we go. Everybody's here. Welcome everyone to the Robin Report Annual Forum. I'm Deborah Patton, the editor of the Robin Report, and I want to thank all of you for joining in the first of our series of in-depth conversations about how retailing is being re-engineered during the past 8 months. Today, we're tackling how innovation has been accelerated by the pandemic and the economic disruption. And we've got 3 original thinkers and innovators for this conversation. First, Robin Lewis, founder and CEO of the Robin Report, who is with us from Florida. Stacey Shulman in California, who's been the Chief Innovation Officer of Intel and just recently transitioned to the General Manager of Intel's Healthcare and Life Sciences Division. And Pauline Brown, author of Aesthetic Intelligence, joining us from Long Island. So today, they're going to discuss and debate innovation for about 40 minutes, and then I'll be back to field a Q&A from you, our audience. So please use the Q&A box for questions down at the bottom of your screen for any of our 3 speakers. And before I pass it off to Robin, a huge thanks to our collaborative partner, Intel, for helping us produce the annual forum. So Robin, the screen is all yours.
Well, thank you, Deborah. And good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, everybody in our audience, for joining us. And I have to tell you, we are very fortunate today. And frankly, I'm quite honored to have 2 of my smartest and best friends. And personally, it's great to see you both, even though it's virtual. And by the way, both of these women have innovation at the core of their DNA, so to speak. Stacey in her role at Intel, and Pauline as the author of Aesthetic Intelligence, which, by the way, I suggest you get that book and everybody in the audience should read it. It has something in it for all of you. Actually, it's a profound thesis, in my opinion, that reveals perhaps the most powerful yet overlooked potential value in brands. Its genesis comes from Pauline's teaching up at Harvard Business School. And so anyway, and by the way, the full bios are on our site if you guys want to see a little bit more about their backgrounds. So before we get into our topic on innovation, I'd like you guys to spend just a couple more minutes on what you're doing, just to give our audience a little bit better understanding of you, who you are. And Stacey, you are and have been a central figure in big tech at Intel. So give us a little deeper dive into what you're doing today.
Sure. Thank you, Robin. Yeah, my team right now today, I mean, we're now kind of in the middle of a transition over to health and life sciences, but we still have been in the past have been focused and still are focused on retail, banking, education, hospitality. I mean, we look at any vertical that touches a person. And so healthcare was a natural transition for us as well to take on health and life sciences. What we look at is we look at emerging technology and we look at how do we take that emerging technology and help innovate in different areas. So we look at anything that's a buzzword. Honestly, we're probably looking at it. If it's a robot, we're working with them. We're figuring out how to scale them, how to make them affordable for everybody. We're looking at, what are the right use cases for those robots in retail, banking, hospitality. We're also looking at now, like, what's the role of robotics within the healthcare industry, especially now in the age of COVID. We also look at things like artificial intelligence and what are the areas of artificial intelligence that are most beneficial for those industries that we service, and how do we get that scale out there? What kind of ecosystems need to be built? What are the obstacles for adoption? And again, any buzzword you can think of, whether it's blockchain or AI, computer vision, you name it, we're touching it, we're looking at it, and we're looking at how to make it work in an industry. So that's kind of the gist of what I'm up to these days.
Yeah, you guys are really the future. Big, deep tech, all of which I'm still trying to comprehend. So Pauline, happily, we became good friends many, many years. I shouldn't say many, many years ago.
It was many years.
It was. When you headed up strategic planning for the Estee Lauder Group. And from there, my God, you took off into a lot of C-suites in major and iconic brands. Don't have enough time to go through all of them, but the most recently, you were president of LVMH North America. And now a professor, which I think is great. So tell us a little bit more, Pauline, and also touch a little bit more on the book.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Robin, for having me. I'll take advantage of any excuse to be in conversation with you. So
Isn't that nice?
Stacey, if you are all about the future, I guess I'm all about the past. I wrote this book, Aesthetic Intelligence, and I only somewhat in jest call aesthetic intelligence the other AI. And it is the human advantage. It is the only thing that robotics and your form of AI and technology in general will not over or outrun humans in my lifetime. I spent most of my career, as Robin mentioned, working like yourself, Stacey, in big companies, helping them or doing my best to help them get bigger. They were all built around big ideas and design-driven concepts. So it was in cosmetics and fashion, watches and jewelry, other areas of luxury. I kind of came to the conclusion around 2015-16 that there was something missing in the business vernacular that I had sort of intuitively picked up in the fields that I was in because they would not have existed without great aesthetic content. And that thing had extraordinary potential for companies that never even thought aesthetic mattered. You know, we saw that with the Steve Jobs example many years ago, and now industry after industry, at least those that are finding ways to do it well, are redefining what business they're in by using aesthetics. Aesthetic intelligence is not just an ability to understand aesthetics, but it's actually in the business context, ability to mobilize other people toward a very clear and exciting aesthetic proposition or aesthetic view that will excite the buyer, whether the buyer is a woman shopping for clothes or a guy shopping for an electric vehicle, whatever it is. And so really getting into what is our own aesthetic intelligence or I would say more simply our taste levels and how to execute on it in business context. I teach the course at Columbia now. It was the Harvard course, now I brought it to Columbia, and I'm working on an education platform that'll be out next year. This is so that people can actually take a version of the course online.
Fabulous. Well, you know, that's why you two are a perfect match, because it's AI on the human level and AI in the tech world, which, by the way, I think is incredible, and what it does for retail. So, okay, you guys are great, and let's dive into this subject. And I think we're going to have a fun and energetic conversation, hopefully. Anyway, innovation, you know, and you guys know this probably better than I, has become a buzzword, and I think almost too much a cliche, actually, when it comes to what a company or brand says make them great. I don't know, it's almost a fallback for a lot of fallback term for strategic plans and corporate statements, because it has become so ubiquitous in our lives. Yet the pandemic and the economic disruption today has really accelerated the absolute need for innovation. So the first thing I'd like to ask you guys to do is, in your own words, how would you define innovation? And I don't know, Stacey, you want to kick that off?
Sure. Yeah, I like to define innovation in a couple of ways. I know that, first I'll start with what I don't think it is. Innovation isn't coming up with a new idea. Innovation is solving the right problem. And that's the way I define innovation. It's really understanding what problem needs to be solved and removing the constraints around the thinking on how to solve that and solving it. And I know that sounds kind of boring, but that's one of the first things I do with the team. When we look at what do we want to innovate on, we don't think of like what are novel new ideas. We think of what are the problems out there that seem too audacious for people to tackle. And we look at what are all the obstacles, why can't we solve that problem? And we get the grumpiest people in the room sometimes to tell you all the reasons why you can't solve it. And in there, we think, there's some really good pockets of possibility and talking about what's not possible. And so, when we look at innovation, it's really about, taking a possibility thinking to problems that are really hard and looking at the problem from a lot of different angles. And with that, we work with artists, we work with architects, we work with people who think very, very differently than an engineer. And you put a lot of those types of thinkers in the room to solve a problem, and you come out with what I think is real innovation.
It's very interesting, fascinating, actually, in how you engage with the arts, and you find these new ways in many different parts, rather than it's not just science. And innovation and solutions, very interesting way of looking at that. Pauline, how would you define it from your perspective?
I mean, like you, Robin, I really struggle with the word in part because it's overused, and in part because it's actually misused. Innovation comes from the Latin root novus, N-O-V-U-S. Novice is just new. And one of the many problems with the way innovation is often thought of and used is it's just new for new's sake. And new for new's sake is like spinning wheels. I mean, I look at it, if I'm in a big company, it really is about renovation, and if you think about a renovation project, just in the context, say, of a house, it's about preserving what still works and what is beautiful and what is time tested. And it's about modernizing that which takes you forward and actually has additional value add and maybe even makes it more beautiful. So I prefer, in a large company context, thinking of it as renovation. In an upstart or a newer company that's looking to disrupt, I prefer words like reshaping or reframing, recasting, because in those cases, you're not going to win simply by renovating. In fact, you probably have nothing to renovate. And you really have to look at things, much as Stacey described it, I'm just using different vernacular, from a different lens of how can I get at that problem in a way that big companies with lots of legacy systems couldn't compete.
Yeah, it's like just keep doing better what we've always been doing. It's like incremental innovation versus fundamental information. I like the way you put that. So yeah, and I think big corporations struggle with not only understanding that word in the context of their huge companies and so forth, but also how to really implement it and get it into the culture. So I think those are good perspectives on innovation. So what does it take to be an innovator today? Is it original thinking? I don't know, an open source process where we build new ideas on top of the old. It's kind of what we were saying here, incremental. So is there a secret ingredient to being an innovator? Pauline, you want to?
I don't think there's a single ingredient. I would say, stepping back, that today more than ever, for an individual, whether he or she is a CEO or entry level, but to be adaptive, and by that I don't mean simply in what you're willing to do or how you do it, but even adaptable in how you think about things. Being able to keep up with all the changes without getting carried away by all the changes, because there's an awful lot of the systems in which we live and the things that make us human that haven't changed in 100 years, and we forget that as well. So it's sort of keeping that balance. I think it's being an original thinker, but not at the expense of being grounded in reality and in pragmatism. So at least those are some of the ingredients that I think to be effective, whether you're in an innovation department or you're in a more traditional department trying to innovate on the margins.
Yeah, that's good. Stacey, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with what Pauline said, and I would add that it's cultural. I think to be an innovator, it's not a single ingredient. It's an attitude. It's cultural, and I think what happens too often is that the word innovation has become a proxy for somebody communicating I'm relevant, and a company saying I'm relevant, and they use the word innovative to replace relevant. And so I think that, yeah, you can be relevant and still not be innovative, and that's okay. But you absolutely are going to lose your relevancy if you don't have a culture of people who want to solve problems and think differently and push, challenge the orthodoxies and, push on the edges. And so I think to me, innovative companies are companies that embrace the troublemakers in their organizations. They're the companies that should be putting troublemakers in air quotes. They embrace the people who make others feel uncomfortable because they're asking hard questions. They don't try to norm everybody down into complacency, which I see it happen in a lot of big companies. But they really embrace that diversity and inclusion, and not just diversity of what people look like, but diversity of how they think and how they come up to the problem, diversity of personalities. And, you've got a mix of people who are real, like numbers people who want to understand the numbers, and you've got people who want to understand the process, and you got people in the organization who want to understand the impact on others, and people who want to understand the aesthetics of it, like what Pauline is saying, because it is so important to understand all of those things mixed into one. So to me, that's, an innovative company is a company that builds those core values in their business.
Is that a big challenge for Intel to, I would imagine that their culture is pretty well based around innovation to a certain extent, but as they continue to be bigger and bigger, is it a tough thing to embed in the culture?
Yeah, it's a challenge for every company. And Intel, we're on our own journey there, is that, we for many years hired a very, very typical type of person, from the same schools, same type of GPA, same computer, backgrounds, same engineers, one of 5 degrees that you got hired from, unless you were in finance. And, and then we were very, it was harmony, because you get a bunch of engineers together who think exactly the same. It's pure harmony, right? And then you throw in some troublemakers who don't think the same, and it causes a little discord in the mix. We're really on this journey of embracing inclusion, not just diversity, but really including people into the conversation of different mindsets. And like any company, it's hard. It's not just like, it's not because people don't want to include others. It's because, it's uncomfortable when you're around people that don't think like you. That's normal. So, getting a company and building the mechanisms for a company to say, no, you need these people to make you better, and to make people personally get into a position where they're okay being challenged at every level. That's part of the transformation that the company has to go through, and we are on that path, and committed to that path, actually, at an executive level.
Pauline, when you were heading up strategic planning at Estee Lauder Group, I got to know most of your executive suites pretty well. Seemed to me that there was a culture of innovation from Leonard on down. And do you think they still have it? Well, I don't want to put you in a tough spot. Do you think they still have a good basis in innovation?
No, I don't.
Oh, well.
I don't. I mean,
okay.
look, when I was there, I was part of I was there. It was a very unusual inflection point for the company, because Leonard, who was the son of Estee and really the co-founder of the company, was still in charge. While it was a public company, it was newly listed as a public company. And so it was, I'd say, still operating in part like a private company. It had public shareholders, but majority interest, and about 90% of the voting rights were still within the family. And I think that allowed the group to take risks that I have never seen pure public companies have the comfort and the courage to do. And it is not that form of ownership today. It's not that decision-making structure. It's a lot bigger and more complex. They've taken a lot of the inefficiencies out. So clearly there was a lot of value that was unleashed in the 15 years or so since I left. But it lost something in the process. And I'm sure it's trying to get it back. It's very hard for companies to do both well, to scale and to create a strong architecture, to have disciplined systems, and at the same time to surprise and delight customers with ideas that, you know, can only come from one wacky creative person, you know, to a large audience that has never seen it before. Typically those kind of ideas and product concepts don't come out of big companies, which is why big companies end up buying them.
Yeah, and you know, the beauty sector today is just unbelievable in terms of the competition, the new products and new brands every day of the week, right?
Well, I'd say there's a proliferation of new brands. And, you know, back in the day, I mean, when I was a private equity investor, I did an investment in a brand, and it was Philosophy, which we sold a few years later to Coty, another corporate buyer. Everyone thought we overpaid. They couldn't believe private equity was I guess, arrogant enough to think they could play that game. And it was really the beginning of a wave where, you know, I've seen the multiples on resale go trade much higher than when I was there. So the nature of the industry has changed a lot. The competitiveness of it has changed a lot. Some of that has to do with the accessibility to manufacturers that entrepreneurs didn't have 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And but I would say it's probably the pendulum is ready to swing back a bit.
Yeah, I think the path for a lot of these huge corporations is, yes, they should be seeking and finding and acquiring these newbies that are coming up that have some degree of success. Anyway, you're talking about all this, you know, we're in a retail world today, which I think existential crisis is probably an understatement. I mean, we see all these bankruptcies all over the place. And I think a lot of the big guys coming into the pandemic who were in deep debt, I don't think they're going to survive anyway. So the field has really kind of polarized between, you know, the essentials that really have soared over the past 7 months, incredibly so. And then the non-essentials, really, that are really an endangered species, if you want to put it that way. So first of all, what advice would you guys give to the leaders of the winning, you know, the winners in the middle of this thing, the Walmarts, the Targets, Kroger's, Home Depots? What would you say to them, advise them so that they can stay ahead and in the lead such as they are? You know, obviously it would be easy to become complacent if most of your competitors are closed or dying. So I don't know, Stacey, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, I talk to these companies fairly regularly, and I would say, you know, here's what I want to make sure everyone knows, that the big guys, they are investing like I've never seen before in retail. And they are investing as though their businesses depend on it, in innovation and in making changes at a speed that we've never seen. I've been in retail over 25 years. I've never seen companies this size, the size of the Targets and the Walmarts of the world, investing the way that they are. And so I see that so my advice to them would be, you know, keep going, keep moving, and start thinking more about your communities and incorporating some of the goodness that you can bring into your community, especially now, because your communities need you. And so, and your communities will remember whether you leaned in at this time and helped them, or whether you just profited off of them. They're going to remember this time. And so what you do now matters. And so don't innovate at the expense of your customer base, and don't innovate at the expense of the communities that you service. And think about that. And we're seeing some really good thoughts out there. You know, we have one retailer as an example that noticed that local children were coming and doing their homework in their parking lots. And it's because they're in rural communities and the kids did not have internet access at their homes. And so they would come and use the guest Wi-Fi. Now, they could have taken a couple different approaches, and the approach that they took was, how do we offer this for all of our communities? That's the approach that they took. And I think that's the type of retail company that is going to ingratiate themselves into their communities, because they really made a difference and they were really thoughtful about the types of services that they could bring. So I would say for the big retailers out there, know that you have an obligation to the communities that you're in, and really think about ways that you can use your innovative muscle to help those communities right now. That would be my current advice.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Your advice is to keep investing in the things you're investing in, i.e. technology and so forth, but also invest in humanity and communities where you are. And, we write about this. I've written a lot about Target and Walmart and these guys. They are doing that. And you're touching on something that the consumer is really driving today. The new millennial and Gen Z consumers are driving the sustainability, all these other concepts, community, inclusiveness, all that stuff. And because they are driving it, it will stick. It used to be a PR thing, marketing thing. Oh, we do this, we contribute to that, we do this charity and so forth. But today they are either responding or they probably won't be around. So, Pauline, if you got any kind of things that you would advise these winners?
Well, let me just say, I hope Jeff Bezos is listening to what Stacey just said. I'm sure he subscribes to that. So, look, these large industry leaders, the Walmarts of the world, they are certainly having a moment. I mean, there were so many locked-in advantages over the last 6 months that gave them sort of disproportionate share of whatever activity is happening in the market. That won't go on forever. Not to say Walmart is going away and that the pendulum will swing completely in the other direction and we'll only be buying Cartier earrings, but the shift or the balance will inevitably change. And I would say what Walmart and the other examples you offered have never done well, and will allow them to sort of capitalize on the balancing effect that I described, is when they start to say, okay, we got the essentials, we do it well. Our supply chain has to continue to improve on the margins, but there's, that's not where we're going to double our market size. Let's also dedicate some of that innovation to how do we delight people and how do we offer them experience and how do we, create environments that people are drawn to, not just for the essentials they can buy, not just for the sort of transactional benefit, but because there's a sense of community, and not just the kind of community that Stacey described, which is very important, but community just because people can come there and be together again and actually enjoy being with other humans. And I don't think any of those companies historically or possibly presently are thinking in that way.
I think Target is, I think Walmart is. Yeah, Pauline, I do think there's some movement in that direction.
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, before this year, not just before the pandemic, no, over the last couple of years, of course, they're so huge, they move a little bit slower than perhaps they should be, but I think they are. I really do think they are. So what about the losers out there? The small guys, the specialty brands, and my God, the department stores, they would like all the advice they can get. We could probably have another, 2 or 3 hours that we could talk about this. I try to write about it all the time and kind of, slam them for not doing more. But so what Pauline, you want to start here?
Sure. Well, so I just joined the board of the newly emerged from bankruptcy Neiman Marcus. I suppose you could call one of the losers by virtue of having, gone through bankruptcy. by virtue of being a department store and by virtue of selling high-end fashion, which is not exactly what, an essential, that Walmart has been able to grow share on. So, and why do I feel great about this board? Because I certainly wouldn't have agreed to join it if I thought it was doomed. Because I think for retailers that are doing something important and special that no one else is quite doing, that they have an opportunity to double down. And let's just use the Neiman example. There is no other, if you want to call it a department store, if you want to call it a luxury specialty store, but there's really none other of scale that I'd say have maintained the standards of luxury that they have, that still believe in service with regards to the personal shopping. I'm not saying they haven't missed over the years, but the things that have propelled them to where they were in years past, the fact that they're a leading player online and off, by the way, in luxury fashion, I think that will continue to serve them well going forward. An ability to buy for their markets, an ability to connect with especially their top customers, an ability to tell stories around fashion, which just because whether people have means or not, whether people are buying high heels or not, people do care about trends and they do care about looking good and expressing themselves. And Neiman's has a role to play in that. And unlike Macy's, it's not that big, doesn't have such a huge footprint that it can't continue to sustain its position. It just needs to operate well, and it needs to not try to compete with Macy's or, for that matter, Net-a-Porter, because what it does, neither of those two companies can do.
Critics, and some would consider experts, believe that what originally got them in the mess, where they got so much debt piled on top of debt, was a bit of arrogance and the inability to understand the incoming millennial and Gen Z next generation customers, and it put them behind. And however, there were some signs that they were beginning to come out of that. So now that you are on their board, I imagine that you will have a lot of influence. And what would you say about that, the critics on those two things?
I'm a critic. Okay. I couldn't believe they opened the Hudson Yards location, and thank God before I joined, they closed it. So I'm not saying they haven't made a lot of mismoves, but I'd say the biggest and the most obvious, which is really what propelled them into bankruptcy, was going through a series of private equity hands and having pre-bankruptcy $5 billion in debt. So for every dollar that came in through a sales, think about 90% of it was going back to servicing debt, as opposed to actually stores and the customers and learning about millennials.
So you think they've got a good leader now? I have not met him.
I do.
Okay,
he's terrific. Yeah, he's terrific.
Yeah. So Stacey, what do you got for advice?
Yeah, I know that you and I have had many discussions on this. I think a multiple hour lunch on this topic.
Yeah.
I think that, let me talk about the Macy's of the world. And while I have huge amounts of respect for, my friends and colleagues over there, I still believe that they can't increment their way out of this. And this incremental innovation, if they think that, what's going to save them is ship from store, they're mistaken. They're missing the whole point, is that the experience that you get in that shopping is not good. And it's not differentiated. It's subpar, and ship from store isn't going to fix that for you. And so technical innovation, I would say, this sounds crazy coming from me at Intel. I would say, maybe put that aside for a minute and go fix your customer journey and go fix how you service that customer and the types of products that you give to that customer and differentiate your experience. And it not in gimmicky ways, not in ways that, you're trying to, entice a new customer. Go look at the customer you have and ask them what they want and what kind of service levels do they want. If they're going to drive to your location and they're going to spend their time with you, what kind of service levels do they want? And are you providing that? And if you're not, then why would they shop you versus Kohl's, quite frankly?
Yeah.
And You know, and I'd give the same advice to Kohl's for the record. You know, they're now going to get into Target's territory. It's going to be Target and Kohl's fighting it out for that apparel and beauty shop. You know, Macy's, how do you differentiate? And I would say, you know, the Neiman's of the world, they were starting to get pulled into that too, right? And you know, where they should have been differentiating by going higher end, everyone started commoditizing down to compete with the likes of the Rosses of the world. And when you're a Neiman, you just shouldn't be in that corner. I mean, that's not what you are. And you got to, I think, go back to your roots and what made you. And same thing with Nordstrom. You know, if you made yourself on that customer experience and that's what you made yourself on, but then you get too kind of involved with doing things that are outside of your customer's comfort zone and lose that customer without replacing them with a new customer that you delight just as much, then you've got a recipe for disaster. So I'd say I could talk all day about the department stores, but I think realistically, you know, you've got a lot of real estate that you can leverage to do something really innovative. And, you know, I think there's going to be some new players like the Area 15s of the world that come in.
Oh, yeah.
And start really showing these guys what experiential looks like. And now an Area 15 is not appropriate for like a Neiman crowd. That would be weird. But right. But Macy's, you know, you're going to have to do something truly revolutionary. You can't increment your way out of this.
Yeah. Plus, they're stuck in malls, which are really, you know, in deep doo-doo. But you know, I'm heartened by Nordstrom Local and what Rachel Sheckman started at Macy's before the pandemic hit, which was this Market by Macy's down in Texas, which both of these are test stores, but the idea is to bring an experience back, to bring localization. And Rachel did a tremendous amount of research down in that Texas area so that everything about that little shop and everything in it is very local. And the goods that are put in there through data analytics and AI are preferred items of the consumers in that particular local neighborhood. Target's neighborhood strategy, which is another way of getting closer to the consumer and making the experience more relevant to people in that particular area, like Michigan State University, for example. Anyway, so yeah, I think of all of the big guys, I think Macy's has the biggest challenge, and I don't know what's going to happen there. But those are good things, both of you guys. So what are some of the most interesting innovations that you guys have seen? Tech included, but not solely tech driven, okay? And are they sustainable, or are they just, you know, trends, you know, great ideas? And were they accelerated by the pandemic? Stacey, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I've seen innovations necessarily accelerated by the pandemic. What I've seen is people getting out of their way of overanalyzing things that they knew they needed to do. You know, the curbside pickup, that it's not a new trend. That trend was happening. And, you know, I see the pandemic definitely pushed people more into delivering that in a way that worked for their brand. And they didn't overanalyze, you know, they didn't get stuck in the ROI analysis on should we do it now or next year or the year after. I think they accelerated all those conversations and they put it in. And they're seeing really some pretty tremendous benefits of things like that. So I don't know that I would consider that an innovation necessarily. You know, maybe for that business it was. I think that the things that I'm starting to see, I'll talk about what I'm starting to see shape up, is the innovation and the thinking around how do we get the product to the consumer faster. So the everything around leveraging those physical assets of stores to be closer to the customer and get product to the customer. So I would say a ship from store that is real, that is, same day. That those are the areas that I'm starting to see the leaders in the industry thinking about now, and really starting to look at what it needs to support that, whether it's autonomous robotic delivery, which sounds like it may be way out there. We're going to start seeing those show up next year in force in a lot of cities, or it's things like delivery by bicycle or Uber or whatever that is. I mean, we're going to start seeing some creativity coming out around that for those stores that have the necessities. For the fashion retailers, I really like that they're starting to think more about the experience in the store and differentiated experiences. So those areas I'm tracking pretty closely on what those differentiated experiences look like. I've seen lots of trials now on AR and VR, and I think hopefully we're at the tail end of the gimmick trials on those now. And so now I think we're going to start seeing the real things come out of that. As an example, if we're going to see somebody do a VR experience, don't just virtualize your exact copy of your store into the VR world. That's not interesting. It's not compelling. Instead, have people not, you don't want virtually to go through a rack of clothes. Instead, put people, in a real, in a nightclub to shop off the people around them in a VR space. If you're shopping for club attire, put somebody in a nightclub to shop instead of in a store looking through racks. If you're shopping for beach attire, put them on a beach in VR to shop. So, things like that, I think we can start. I'm starting to see more of that sort of thinking around how to take the technologies that are there and use them in a different way.
Very interesting. Yeah. A different way to look at that VR. I think that's a great idea. Anyway, so Pauline, you got things you want to add there?
I agree with Stacey. I think when it comes to retail, the most interesting developments that are still largely untapped are what's going to happen, not so much on the technological side, but on the organic side. I've seen a few examples, and not yet at scale, that have really redefined what a store is and isn't. So for example, if you go to the RH Restoration Hardware store in the Meatpacking District in New York, there's a very popular restaurant on the rooftop, and it has a bar outside.
Oh yeah.
Now you have to go through the entire store, and it's it's otherwise just a place to buy furniture, but it really does give you the restoration hardware experience, and the restaurant has become sort of a go-to place on its own. It isn't just capturing people who are taking a break while they're shopping. Similarly, in Vermont, there's a glassmaker named Simon Pierce based there. They sell in other stores, including some of their own. Very high-end glassmaker. And they have a restaurant on the premise of the factory, which also has a shop and a museum that talks about the glass blowing. And in the restaurant, which is sort of classic Vermont, it's an old American story with the windmill outside, they serve everything on Simon Pierce glassware. And it's just a way to experience Simon Pierce other than just looking at it as a gift for a wedding. It brings their story to life. There used to be a store in New York. Unfortunately, the economics clearly didn't work out, but I thought it was a fascinating idea. It was called Perch. It sold appliances.
Oh, yeah.
But the idea there was you could go in and let's just say you want to test out the Sub-Zero stove or the shower or the Wolf's stove. That they would actually have cooking classes, or you would go into the shower. You wouldn't take a shower, but you could turn it on. And the idea that the individual pieces that you would consider buying, and these are high ticket items, that you could actually experience them, whether you took the shower or you took a cooking class or you just turned on the oven. So I think really breaking down a store doesn't just have to be a rack of stuff, whether it's books or clothes, that people go in with a cash register on the other side, and an entry door and an exit door. And some I think over the years have told stories better than others. I think very few have offered interactivity.
Yeah, well, that's like Lululemon. You go to the yoga class, you're there, you go to the marathon. And by the way, Purge, Pauline, yeah, very interesting. I met the guy and he was on our board. And you could reserve time to take a shower in that. I mean, it's amazing. It was amazing to me. But the thing is, the reason I think it didn't make it, because you're right, it was this whole great experience, is that most of the people that could afford the stuff they sold there have their own personal designers and who go and buy stuff wholesale, right? So Perch was,
the idea was good, but the category was wrong. Right?
Yeah, right.
I think I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater on that one. I think they were tapping into something quite novel.
Yes, they were. You're right. The idea of it was good. So, okay, these are very good comments, and people in the audience are probably getting a good piece of knowledge coming out of you guys. Stacey, one for you. How do you incentivize innovation to your teams?
Yeah, here's what I find. Well, one, the culture has to be there. But two, I think people have to be aligned with their passions, and that a lot of times is incentive enough. And so we spend a lot of time understanding where the team's passions are. And I'll give you some examples. I did a test, if you will, where I gave 20% of everybody's time. You spend 20% of your time doing any passion project that you want, no constraints. And we talked through those, and there were some people, and you would ask, like, what is your passion project? And they're like, my passion is driving revenue for the business. You're like, no, that's your ambition, not your passion. So let's talk about real passions, things that you would be proud to tell your grandchildren about, later in life, those kinds of passion projects. And what we found is that, not everybody participated. Some people just didn't know. They had to do some soul searching to get to what they were really passionate about, which is there's some value there in driving innovation as well. But the people who did, there were some people who knew exactly what they were passionate about, and they, kick-started projects. We gave no constraints. It didn't have to make money for the company at all. It had to be something they were passionate about. It could be you're passionate about, helping in schools. It didn't matter. But the moral of the story is that what we found is that those passion projects now are on track to outpace in revenue-wise for our business all of our chartered projects that we had in the last couple of years. I mean, by a lot. I can't give numbers, but it's meaningful. And we've already pulled revenue through for some of those projects. And these are projects that people are they would do the project for free because they're so passionate about it. And so when you align people with those passions and you give them the freedom and the space to do things that they really deep down in their core want to do to help humanity, a lot of times it's all the incentive you need is to just give them the space. People feel delighted that they can work on things that they're passionate about at work and get paid to do it. And
that's
so
great. Yeah.
That's what we do. There's no other real incentive structure other than just give people the space to do things that they love.
That is terrific. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, I'm here for the 10-minute warning, ladies.
Okay, wait 1 second, because I want Pauline to comment on this question. So Pauline, yeah, you're an expert, in the role that aesthetics play in promoting not only products and so forth, but good leadership, well-being, the health of a company. So talk to us a little bit about that before Deborah takes over.
Whoa. So obviously it's a big project, and there's a lot of facets to it. I guess if I were to summarize it in just a few sentences, the idea behind it is about 85% of what we buy is driven by how it makes us feel, whether it's a product or a service. Obviously, there's some variances by sector. I'm sure if people are buying an Intel chip, they're not doing it on emotions, but most of the things we buy are emotional driven, with about the remaining 15% being a very logical assessment of costs, of features, of functions, and so forth. in the big companies I've been in and observed, and I've done some advisory work for other large companies in other sectors, close to 100% of the marketers' thought process is around this logical assessment of cost and features and functions.
Right.
And so little empathy to the emotional resonance of what I'm selling. And how can I actually create it in a way that's authentic, that's not, manipulative? And I see plenty of examples of false emotion out there, or attempts at that, but to do it in a way and that really taps into people's need to feel alive, to feel that some product that they buy speaks to them, that it expresses them. And this transcends all categories. And so aesthetics isn't the only way that you can tap into that emotion, but it is one very powerful way. I mean, storytelling, which I referred to earlier, is another way. And storytelling, though, is words. And there's an arc, and there's characters, and there's tension, and there's, and Hollywood does it well, and most companies don't do it well. But aesthetics is something that I think of as tapping into people's need for, for an archetype, and for a way to show who they are in this world, and to speak to their dreams and aspirations. And I don't think that it's simply in the domain of luxury goods or of high end. I think there's a real false dichotomy of, well, that takes money. You know what? At every price point, you can do better when it comes to the aesthetics of your product. And sometimes it costs you no more to do better. And at every affordability level, people still care. Just, I've seen it in the tribes of Africa. People care. They care about, whether they do it, through some of the local crafts, they do it through other sources of pride. And I would like to see that whole way of thinking come into companies in a way that I think has been void for the last 50 to 100 years.
Boy, that is a powerful message, Pauline. It really is. I mean, when you think about it, and you're so right that there are such processed ideas in terms of marketing products and so forth and so on, classic ways that it's been done in the past. But this is the thing about your book. You really bring that out, and it's very incredibly powerful. Thank you for that. Now, I know, Deborah, we had any time for a couple more questions?
Well, we have a couple from the audience, and then we can bring it back to you.
Yeah, I want to do the 12-step program, AA program, but let's
Okay, but then we'll just do one that's not a downer question, but can you guys give us examples of the worst innovations that you've seen?
Good idea.
Yeah.
Cautionary tales. Stacey, you want to start?
Oh, I could give all kinds of examples. Beacons, magic mirrors. I can go on. I mean, I think anything that was a gimmick that nobody understood how to actually scale it, but they felt very passionate about why it was needed in their business. And, they put it in one test store, realized that they had no plan for supporting it, no plan for keeping it running, no understanding of how the customer wanted to use it, no understanding how it would benefit the customer. But it made them look innovative, so they went ahead and put those theatrics into their store. We have lots of examples of those, but yeah, magic mirror is one of my favorite ones to talk about.
So yes, so I have a section of the book I call Failures of Aesthetic Intelligence. And I think that the most, and there are two that come to mind. It dates me a little bit, but still it's notable because they're historic and epic failures. So one is Google Glass. So Google Glass failed because it was too expensive. Nobody turned away because they said, I can't afford it, or I don't want to pay the money. It didn't fail because it didn't do exactly what they set out to do. It had all the features and functions and creepy, aspects and technological, capabilities. It failed because it looked so stupid on people's heads, and because it created this sort of weird dynamic, and there was just such an absence of empathy when and that's a classic case of a bunch of engineers. I'm sure they were all guys in a room in Silicon Valley, just thinking this would be the coolest thing ever, and not really understanding the way the real world works. I don't think Oculus Rift is too far behind. Even though I haven't ruled out virtual reality, I think that the headset was a very clumsy design, and I think, it, instead of presenting it as something that might be a fun game for certain, Gen Z kids, they presented it as something that would be life-changing for people like me who wouldn't even consider putting that on my head. So, yeah, I think there's plenty of them, but those are fairly high-profile ones.
Well, it was Steve Jobs said, we don't need any more engineers. Remember when he said that? I mean, he said, engineers are a dime a dozen. We can get them to do what we want them to, anything we want them to do. But he said, it's all about, I think he said aesthetics, Pauline. I don't know.
Yeah, he used the word taste. He said you can't teach taste,
Yeah.
which I disagree
Yes.
with. I think you can. I think you can teach it. I don't think everyone can be as tasteful as he was.
Yeah, but the importance of that comment is that he really understood. Yeah. Anyway.
He certainly did.
So
Well, and I also want to go on record with saying we definitely need more engineers, but
I'm
just need them pointed at the
Email.
right problems.
Yeah.
With the right training.
Engineers.
Touche.
So
So
yeah.
Robin, you've got one last question, then we have to.
Yeah, this is kind of a fun question. The 12-step AA program, they say that behavior can change in 28 days, right? To cure alcohol, drugs, so forth. People have been stuck at home, for 7 months. So this surpasses that 28-day plan. Do you think this will change shopping addiction behavior? Which I've said that we've been compulsive consumptors.
Well, that's like saying to me if I went to prison for a year, that I would value my freedom again. I think people are dying of loneliness and isolation. And the minute they feel safe and welcome to go out and enjoy life as in a way that they once did, they will. It'll take a while, though.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I think that, look, if somebody wants to shop, they can shop online. I think what's happened is shopping for commodity items is forever changed. It's online, and
Yep.
we're gonna have to just put our arms around that reality and embrace it. However, I think that the need for experience and the need for community and the need for social shopping is going to be bigger than ever. And if companies don't understand how to deliver that, they're in trouble. And so they really need to embrace the experienced designers out there and understand how to drive a better experience for their customer. And like, you don't have time for gimmicks this time. So you got to have to do it right. And you're going to have to get the right people in to look at how to design a great experience for your customer, because they want it. And when they come out of this thing, it's going to be an unstoppable force, I think, of people wanting to go back to some level of normalcy in shopping with their friends again.
Yeah, I think the future is quality over quantity. This country's been quantity for so long, and I think a lot of the cultural shifts with these young people, and I think the pandemic may have accelerated a lot of it, but I think the future will hold more quality than quantity in terms of how people value things. Anyway, I guess we're coming towards the end, and I love you guys, and I really appreciate your, participating in this thing. And I'd love to pick your brains, and I wish we could do it physically at lunch or breakfast or something. So I really appreciate the audience, and I hope you guys out there have learned a lot. Certainly Pauline and Stacey have kind of unloaded their inventory for you. So what do we do?
One last comment. I mean, beyond the fact this is an incredibly intelligent and interesting and opinionated and provocative conversation, which is what we promise at the Robin Report. I just want to remind our audience that our next conversation is on 11/11 with Dave Kimball, who's the CEO of Ulta, one of our retail medicals. President, sorry, Mary Dillon's the CEO. Oh my God. In any case, he's going to talk about the customer experience plus other things. So please join us on the 11th, 11/11. And thank you, ladies, so much, and Robin, of course, but this was an incredibly interesting and meaningful conversation.
I always learn from you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye, guys.